Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was one of the best, most celebrated movies of 2019. Among so many elements that make a film great, like acting, writing, and editing at their peak, it delivered a profound sense of authenticity in every way a film possibly could. It represents not only a high point of 2019, but of Tarantino's entire career. While satisfying his love of all things vintage dipped in blood and recent love of lunatic revisionist history, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood also shows us Tarantino at his most emotionally honest. Lover of all retro minutiae, Tarantino's portrayal of 1969 Los Angeles has received much earned praise for presenting an insane level of loving detail with such giddiness. For the first time in a while, it felt like Tarantino was primarily sharing something he has affection for rather than something he just finds cool. Further evidence to this is the film's greater focus on the characters' emotions than their next amazing one-liner. While it still has Tarantino's sense of humor and pacing, the shift in priorities makes it a little easier to take Once Upon a Time in Hollywood seriously from a straightforward perspective, and its artistic statements are easier to find. Depending on who you talk to, it's about the dying era of old Hollywood, it's about a career ending, it's about self-worth, it's about expressed versus interpreted identity. It's pretty rare to imagine Tarantino making a film with intentional messages, but it's really refreshing, and I think it goes a step further than many people realize. Beneath the puffed-up pastiche of 60s television references and vintage Taco Bell logos, I found an unprecedented level of social commentary from this filmmaker. What if I told you that not only does all of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood take place against a backdrop of abuse towards women, but Tarantino intentionally only left a few small windows to see that this is what the film is truly about? The landscape of discussion about abuse has changed dramatically, especially within Hollywood, the true star of this movie. There is no abuse actually shown in the film, but it is thematically present, lurking just beyond the surface. In a weird way, this is Tarantino's idea of a post-Me Too film. The locus of every story arc in the film provides supporting details that are too small to distract from the moments themselves, but too pointed at this theme to be a coincidence. So I'd like to elaborate on what led me to believe this motif was present to begin with, and then by the time we're done, gain a greater understanding of why Tarantino put it there. So feel free to bear with me here. But in light of the topic's serious nature, I want to carefully lay out a few disclaimers before I delve fully into where this interpretation comes from. This is not me saying Tarantino has abused any women, that the actresses in the film were abused, nor that the film itself or Tarantino are misogynist and promote abuse. Everything I'm going to discuss is a series of symbolic gestures I believe are part of Tarantino's design. This is, of course, an important issue that demands a respectful approach. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has been accused of sexism in its own right on account of Margot Robbie's lack of dialogue, as well as a few choice examples of how women are treated, but my theory is not meant to serve as an argument for or against any of these accusations. I think that's a discussion for another time. Okay? Okay. There are 3 scenes in particular that serve as the observable focal points of this theme. Each of them is either a climax or turning point for the characters involved, which suggests a lasting impact on them. Our foundational understanding of who they are changes after each one. First, I'd like to call attention to the emotional climax of Rick Dalton's character arc. At this point in the film, he has already faced several painful reminders that his career is on a rapid decline, and has only made matters worse by flubbing his lines when shooting a guest spot on the TV show Lancer. After vowing to kill himself, should he continue to forget his lines, Rick returns to set and knocks the next scene out of the park, earning praise from both his director and young co-star. Although this moment doesn't rekindle his career and propel him into stardom, Rick proves his talent to others, but more importantly, reminds himself that he's... well, how does he put it?
Rick fucking Dalton.
This triumphant scene sees Rick playing the episode villain holding Lancer's daughter for ransom. By this point in the film, we've also established the child actress Trudy as an undyingly ambitious perfectionist. We met Trudy in an earlier scene during which she inquires about a book Rick is reading. As he recounts the plot for her, Rick realizes the book's protagonist is on a career decline similar to his own, and cries upon realizing how much they have in common. In a humorous bit of dramatic irony, Trudy only thinks Rick is crying because the story is so moving. But the important part of the scene is when Rick makes this offhand statement.
I'm practically crying and I haven't even read it.
About 15 years you'll be living it.
What?
He makes a direct statement that puts in our heads Trudy will have the same career path as him. Subconsciously, we associate her with the title of the next Rick Dalton, a status that is the film's analog for a career actor. Note that in this whole discussion, there is no question that Trudy will be successful, it's just a matter of how she gets there. Fast forward to the scene of interest and note the actions taking place here. Trudy, as the daughter, is held hostage by Dalton in his lap and thrown on the floor. She's okay though, she's got elbow pads on. As the take ends and the camera pans over to Rick and the director, if you look carefully you'll see Trudy strike up a conversation with another little girl dressed exactly like her. I'm prepared to concretely defend that this girl is Trudy's stunt double, especially since Rick implies he wasn't supposed to throw her on the ground. Of all the things she could be shown doing right after the scene cut, Tarantino makes the very first thing she does go talk to her stunt double. And she seems rather chipper in doing so. This is significant because in our heads we've subconsciously acknowledged that Trudy is the next Rick Dalton. Should you have noticed Trudy went to talk to her stunt double, it's no stretch to assume the other girl is, symbolically, the next Cliff Booth. The friendship between Cliff and Rick is one of the film's defining qualities. By befriending her own stunt double, Trudy is becoming more like him, making this hypothetically blossoming friendship a symbolic step towards success and the only one we actually see her make in the film. Although we know Trudy has the talent and work ethic to become the next Rick Dalton, the movie hasn't shown any of her steps to get there. So the order of events shown to the audience imply it is only after Trudy allows herself to be held hostage by Rick that we see her come closer to success. You might see where I'm going with this. If you strip down what happens in these scenes, you have a young actress with the talent to become a star, a symbolic gesture of that actress submitting herself to being held hostage in the lap of a powerful man, and another symbolic gesture showing that actress's career has advanced after doing so. Now clearly there is no abuse, sexual or otherwise, going on between Nick and Trudy, but for the sake of symbolism, the film implies a direct connection between a woman being abused by a man and her career advancing as a reward. And yes, I get that Trudy is underage, a literal child, but that hasn't stopped Hollywood abusers before. Moving on to the second scene, one of my favorite moments in the film is when Polanski and Tate go to this party. After arriving, we see a gleeful Sharon Tate head to the dance floor as other celebrities gossip about her. Set to Son of a Lovin' Man, and with Margot Robbie's wavy-armed 70s dancing, it makes for a scene that's an overall good time. The thing is, though, we also get further insight about where exactly Sharon Tate is in her career. Through this scene, we understand exactly who she is. Making effective use of color, Tarantino shines a red light on everyone else, while Tate is the only one wearing yellow, so she pops out from everyone else, and our eyes are always drawn to her for a reason besides her being played by Margot Robbie. It is at this point, I believe, we see Tate at her happiest. This is her shining moment. She stands out, she's radiant without a care in the world. People as famous as Steve McQueen are sitting around talking about her drama. Even the slow-motion removal of her scarf on the drive there treats her like a goddess of glamour. She is living the life of a true movie star. She has made it. But note her happiest moment as a character takes place at the Playboy Mansion, the epicenter of a company known as a grandstanding pillar of women's objectification. Tate can succeed all she wants, but the shadow of exploitation and abuse still looms over her. Women have succeeded, at least as actresses, since the dawn of cinema, but that was by no means a protection against the power men have over them. Successful and beautiful as they may be, that all happened on male terms. And this is a recurring theme in the movie, male decisions being made in response to things that have happened to women. Sometimes they're small things, like when Cliff slams Bruce Lee into Zoe Bell's car. Even though it's her car, Kurt Russell assumes responsibility in firing him. Russell and DiCaprio have a short debate over whether or not Cliff murdered his wife. Did Cliff Booth intentionally kill his wife? Perhaps yes, perhaps not. He's definitely careful about going to jail, as we see later when Emilia from The Nice Guys offers to give him roadhead. We never find out whether or not he did, but the answer to that question is ultimately not important to how most of the characters see him. The final scene I want to talk about comes at the very end of the film, where Tarantino makes up for lost time giving us the revisionist history he's been making for a decade now. Here we see the Manson family murderers, led by Tex, approach Sharon Tate's home. After being shooed away by Rick, they recognize him and formulate a plan to go kill him instead. From here on is the deviation from any actual events that took place. Except instead of going on to murder the innocent, the Manson family members are brutally slaughtered by Cliff and a flamethrower-clad Rick in perhaps Tarantino's most cathartic display of violence ever. In the aftermath of the scuffle and subsequent police detail, Rick stands in the cul-de-sac for a moment of stark, almost eerie quiet. Jay goes to the Polanski gate to ask what happened, and Sharon invites Rick in over the intercom. Nice music, roll credits. Addressing the Manson family murder speaks for itself about the abuse of women. A bright young actress lost her life at the hands of a cult looking to spread their message, and through killing her, did exactly that. Although Margot Robbie's performance is one of the most unabashedly gleeful I've ever seen, every instance of her thriving is backhandedly sobering because no matter what the film might show, we all know what really happened to her. One of the most powerful lines in the film to me is in this exchange between Rick Dalton and Jay Sebring.
What do you mean, like trying to rob you?
We don't know what the fuck they wanted with. Were they robbing me? I don't know. Were they freaking out on some bummer trip? Who knows?
Accumulating such a media swarm ultimately gave Manson what he wanted out of killing Sharon Tate. In this version of history, not only was no one killed by his followers, but we never learned his motive behind it in the first place. The world will go on never knowing Charles Manson and his manifesto. As far as anyone knows, it was just a few hippies on a drug-fueled rampage. If you want that same idea exercised through a bit of levity, look at this scene where Francesca gives her statement to the police. The police officer has no idea what she's saying, and therefore cannot get a statement from her, even if he wanted to. Almost as a comedic jab at how, even if it is your job to find out, no one will truly understand all that happened that night. But as great as this ending is, that's not the only reason I'm including it here. As I said, Rick ends up invited to the Polanski residence and makes friends with Sharon. Now, I think the implication here is he gets introduced to Roman, and that launches him into superstardom. That's what makes the most sense anyway. Rick already implied he's
Be one pool party away from starring a new Polanski movie.
And while this one involves more flamethrowers, it is certainly because of events that transpired at his pool that he ends up there. Plus, if he meets Sharon and Jay and that's it, he's still on his way to living off his money in a condo, and that's a bit more depressing than the ending music would suggest. So, all is well, the day is saved, and nobody will ever know the true intentions of a few cult-driven maniacs. Except, when I watched it for the first time, there was kind of an elephant in the room with this ending. The director who will take Rick's career to new heights, who he's been so hopeful he would meet, the prospect of living next to him alone brought him out of a depressive episode, is Roman Polanski. The film's idyllic fairy tale ending is the main character finding fame and friendship with a man who is a child rapist. Not that Rick would know that, but the ending feels much more bittersweet and haunting when you realize the essence of it is, "Hello, Rick, I'm glad you evaded those hippies looking to harm and exploit a young woman. Now meet my husband, Roman Polanski." Now, I understand that being about Sharon Tate, Tarantino probably had to include Roman Polanski in some capacity, seeing as they were married at the time of her murder. And the film rightfully claims Polanski as possibly the most famous director in the world at the time. So it could be nothing more than Tarantino's way of using his roundabout connection to the murders as a clever way to conclude Rick's story arc. But it fits in a little too perfect with my idea of a hidden message about abuse within the film, don't you think?
And he knows, as sure as God made little green apples, that one of these days that Polish prick's gonna fuck things up.
So, what does this all mean? Why would Tarantino bother to hide this theme so deeply within the film? It might be the conspiracy theorist in me, but this being his first film in the post-Me Too world, I wouldn't be surprised if this film was somewhat reactionary to this real-world culture shift. Perhaps it's more like a tacit apology, or at least acknowledgement of his own transgressions. But what does Tarantino have to apologize for? As far as we know, Tarantino has no history of sexual assault. He's certainly a bit of a loon, but he's no rapist. The closest he comes to a Me Too expose is his professional relationship with Uma Thurman. While Thurman initially refused to comment on the Me Too movement out of fear that her anger would lessen the coherence of her statement, a New York Times article published in 2018 records Thurman's testimony as a victim of rape at the hands of Harvey Weinstein. Most of the article is about Weinstein, but there is a section detailing Tarantino's mismanagement on the set of Kill Bill Volume 2. There is a scene in which Uma Thurman was supposed to drive a car which was reportedly unsafe. Although initially objecting, Thurman was coerced into doing the stunt herself and ended up crashing the car. To this day, she lives with neck and knee damage as a result of the crash. While not resulting in the same kind of damage, Tarantino also insisted on being the one to perform certain stunts against Uma Thurman, in which Michael Madsen's Bud spits on her face and Go-Go chokes her with the chain of her flail. These aren't exactly the kind of sexually charged allegations levied against others, but still sort of fits into the mismanagement and neglect of female safety the Me Too movement wants to combat. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood never limits itself to being about abusive acts that are purely sexual, and therefore Tarantino's misdemeanors fall under that umbrella as well. It just makes this explanation sound more plausible. Seems like a reasonable explanation. A lot of people already don't like Tarantino for putting Thurman through this accident, and Tarantino himself has apologized for it many times already, citing it as his biggest regret. It seems like nobody is forgiving him for the accident. Except Uma Thurman. In another article a few months after the New York Times one, Thurman not only expressed forgiveness towards Tarantino, but even said she'd work with him again should he provide the right script. Does this pardon him from what he did? Well, it certainly doesn't hurt. But for the sake of this video, it's less likely that he would go to such trouble elaborately hiding an acknowledgement of his actions if the person he's hurt already forgives him. Tarantino has also, however, worked with Harvey Weinstein very closely throughout his career. Is the film an apology for that? Well, what's the ground for this? Every movie Tarantino has ever made is either produced by Weinstein or distributed under Miramax, which he owns. Until Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. If the film is a hidden apology, it could be an elaborate slight against him. Their business relationship was terminated after the Weinstein allegations began, but in a sense, Tarantino still kind of owes his career to Weinstein. When asked about him, Tarantino said that he knew enough to do more than he did, and even confronted Weinstein about it at some point. This does not make him look good. Whether or not he's being genuine or frantically trying to distance himself from Harvey, it would do him well to denounce abuse wherever he can. The ending's ominous undertones could mimic Tarantino's journey with Polanski representing Weinstein. Someone who is good, but with the potential to be great, becomes enabled by a Hollywood legend who turns out is a rapist. If Rick Dalton were real, in all likelihood, he could end up aware of Polanski's actions and do nothing about them, just as people are accusing Tarantino of doing with Weinstein. So there's two theories with remote plausibility as to why Tarantino would include this theme. But I can still sense some resistance towards my theory proving true, because these two motivations sound reasonable enough on paper, but neither of them sound like something Tarantino would actually do. Through all of this speculation and cinematic analysis, it's important to remember that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is made by a twitchy weirdo with a foot fetish who just so happens to be an auteur filmmaking wizard. As much as I've said this film is from a more emotional and personal Tarantino, including this theme as a direct apology in a post-Me Too era sounds like a bit much. I didn't want to discount the previous theories as impossible, but I have another idea that I believe is more likely. The film itself is the bottom line with Tarantino. You can see in interviews and promotional footage across his career how giddy he gets when talking about his inspirations and the process of conceptualizing what goes into the movie. Not saying he wouldn't include a message about abuse, but if he did, he would do it because he felt it enhanced the story. If we can find a way for it to serve a narrative purpose, then I think that is the most likely theory. So, how exactly would this help tell the story? The same reason there are so many scenes of people driving around. If you put every review of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in a randomizer and picked one, chances are the phrase, "love letter to old Hollywood," or something like that is in there somewhere. And that's true. It is a meticulous portrait of a place. 1969 Hollywood is recreated down to the last vintage vehicle careening around the freeway. And Tarantino really enjoys letting you know that. block after block of equally well-realized Los Angeles is put on display. Same goes for the clothes the characters wear, the cars they drive, and the way they speak. The Manson family is greasy as shit. Dakota Fanning looks like she hasn't washed her face in 8 years. Tarantino includes a ton of footage made to look like old movies and TV shows, and it all looks period appropriate. He's created this pocket dimension of absolute production design perfection. It's obvious Tarantino longs for the era's cultural aesthetic. This isn't The Nice Guys, where aspects of the film have retro prestige and the period detail is just good. One of Tarantino's objectives with this film was clearly to recreate the era down to the last, smallest detail, and will go out of his way in the script to include more opportunities to do that. We now understand on a fairly universal level the abuse of women within this era Tarantino seeks to so faithfully encapsulate in this portrait of a place. It's a portrait, all right, but because of this theme it includes the bad as well as the good. And if the bad was hidden so well from the public back then it should follow suit in a film capturing the era. I wouldn't rule out him putting a message of abuse in the film and hiding it so well for no other reason than era authenticity. That is why the through line of abuse sticks out to me. I think the most logical explanation is Tarantino is acknowledging the hidden nightmare old Hollywood was, and doing so in a way that's just as well kept a secret as the abuse itself. It is nothing more than a morbid example of period detail. Thanks a lot for watching this video. I really appreciate it, but you know what I'd appreciate even more? If you gave me a little subscribey-bybey down there. If you're the kind of person who doesn't like watching movie reviews made by fucking phonies, then yeah, subscribe. You like my channel. What are you waiting for? Do it. Come on.